So now we are live.
We're live.
Hello, everyone, and warmest greetings. Today is Tuesday, May 19, and this is Insights with Chris and Olga, the Cell and Gene Talk. I'm Chris, CEO of Barkey, live from Germany, together with my co-host and dear friend, Olga, manager at Aseptic Technologies. Thanks for joining, Olga, live from Belgium. Together, we have three experts with us, and we are very proud to welcome Bruce from Philadelphia and Lizette from San Francisco, both United States, and as well Luca from Milan, Italy. Thank you for being with us, and you will be introduced briefly shortly from Olga and me.
Thank you, Chris. Well, it is clear that COVID-19 took over the global agenda. It is really unprecedented, it is a big tragedy, and at the same time, it underscored the importance that scientific discovery and innovation has in all of our lives. So at Aseptic Technologies and Barkey, we have So at Aseptic Technologies and Barkey, we came together to launch a dedicated event to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the field where we're really active in, is the field of the cell and gene therapy manufacturing.
Since this is a live session, we apologize for any transmitting problems sometimes, but actually Olga and me, we plan a series of webinar insights with Chris and Olga over the next months. And very happy to inform you guys out there about what's going on in the cell and gene therapy space. So for those who missed today the live version, we will have a recorded version available on YouTube and LinkedIn later on.
Thank you, Chris. So now we're going to briefly introduce ourselves and our dear panel of experts. So then we're going to move to the actual discussion about the impact of COVID-19 on the cell and gene therapy manufacturing. And during this time, please don't hesitate to comment here below in order to prepare for the Q&A session that we're going to have by the end of this event. We're going to take a few questions depending on how much time is left to address to our panel. So now let me start with introducing. I'll start with the introduction of my co-host, Chris. Chris, he's a CEO of company Barkey, a global supplier of thawing technology, so crucial for manufacturing and preparation for administration of the cell and gene therapy products. Their device makes part of the patent and protocol for Kymriah, the first FDA-approved CAR-T therapy.
Thank you so much, Olga. Let me continue with your introduction. Olga is the sales and marketing manager at Aseptic Technologies, and she's helping actually biopharmaceutical companies to deliver their cell and gene therapies to their patients by bringing to the aseptic filling operations to actually each site. So their fill and finish technology is based on a unique while ensuring safe cryopreservation and use at clinical sites.
So today's expert roundtable about COVID-19 impacting the cell and gene therapy manufacturing, we have three really impressive speakers with us today. So let me first introduce Dr. Bruce Levine. He's a Barbara and Edward Netter professor in cancer gene therapy, and he's a founding director of the Clinical Cell and Vaccine Production Facility at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. He is also a co-inventor of Kymriah, licensed to Novartis, the first FDA-approved CAR-T therapy. And he is also co-founder of Teammunity Therapeutics, and he is a president-elect of ISCT. Welcome, Bruce.
Hi, Olga. Hi, Chris. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much. Bruce. So it's an honor to be that I can introduce Lizette Caballero. I visited Lizette just shortly before the lockdown back in San Francisco, and Lizette is the CAR-T Apheresis site liaison at the Janssen pharmaceutical companies of Johnson & Johnson. Lizette has spent the last 21 years in the cellular therapy field, first managing the cellular therapy lab at Florida Hospital and then the blood and marrow transplant lab at UCSF, before she just recently joined her new role at Johnson & Johnson. Thanks for being with us, Lizette.
Thank you for inviting me. Very excited.
Great. And Luca, ciao Luca to Italy. Luca Alberici is the Chief Business Officer of MolMed, the first company actually in Europe who have obtained the GMP manufacturing authorization for cell and gene therapies for its products. So he has been responsible there for R&D, product development, and drug candidate scouting. So welcome, Luca.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Olga.
Warm greetings. And so now let's hear from our speakers. And the first things first, we would like to ask to you, our panel, and also to the audience, so don't hesitate to comment. So out of curiosity, how many flights did you need to cancel due to the traveling restrictions caused by COVID-19? What about you, Bruce?
Yeah, so a lot of flights. I was scheduled to be speaking in northern Italy, actually, in April. That was the first to be canceled. It was a meeting in Pavia. Also, the IACT, which we've converted to a virtual meeting in Paris.
Right.
That would have been leaving tomorrow or, well, Sunday, I believe, to go to Paris. Had a trip to Israel canceled. Many more domestic flights, vacation to Italy canceled, everything through August. So I have had a lot less time using my suitcase and packing and unpacking and going through security.
Thank you, Bruce. What about you, Lizette?
So same here. I was scheduled to leave on Friday to go to Paris for the IACT annual meeting. I also had a few vacation trips, and my anniversary is coming up, and I was supposed to be either in Spain or Italy with my husband, and everything was canceled. So, and quite a few domestic traveling too.
Right. Thank you. And what about you, Luca?
Yeah, well, you know, I generally participate to between 10 and 15 conferences a year, plus prospective client meeting, current steering committee with the current clients, financial roadshows. So I'm generally on the road every other week. And so you can just imagine how many flights I had to cancel throughout the summer. And let's see if in September we are allowed to restart traveling.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I think it's more or less the same for us with Chris and for everyone, actually. And indeed, 80% of commercial flights got canceled these days, and only this factor actually had a major impact on already pretty complex supply chain for cell and gene therapies, and which kind of rely a lot on commercial fleet. And this is one among numerous other challenges related to our today's topic. So that was an opener, and now let's please go forward with our discussion. So it's now up to you, Chris.
Thank you so much, Olga. Lizette, the first question which we would like to get answered from you is, how did COVID-19 and the lockdown affect you personally?
So I would have to say that the biggest impact in me is this one-to-one personal connection with people. You know, I've been working from home. It's hard not to have that one-to-one. People that know me know that I'm a social being. And I'm kind of like a hyper in a way kind of person. So being in the house all day is being affecting me kind of. So I have to do something, and what I do is I go outside and at least walk for an hour just to see nature. But that's one of the biggest impact that I have right now.
Yeah. when I remember our meetings, I totally agree. That is something we miss, that we can't really interact. And I heard that you and Bruce are also having good times on shows and spending time together, and also off track beside the official event, I heard.
Yeah.
So, Luca, how is the situation? I mean, you're in Italy. Your country was pretty much in the spot of talks when it's about COVID-19. So how was it for you personally then?
Yeah, well, it was a big surprise. Of course, we didn't have any other Western country to learn and take as an example to kind of react to this crisis, and so we got a little bit creative. On my personal side, I think I'm on the kind of lucky side because none of my close circle has been affected, both under the healthcare and from the job profile from this crisis. But given the spread here in northern Italy of COVID, many people that I know of that are not strictly in my close circle have lost someone in their family or are on temporary leave for the job. So my only impact has been on the daily routine, for which I still try to come to the office basically every day, at least partially, both to kind of ensure rapid decision making, especially at the beginning of this crisis where we didn't really know and we were not really prepared for, and also to make all our team and employees kind of feel together in this. And I think it's kind of expected from a senior leadership position to act like this.
May I ask, during, let's say, the very peak time in Italy, have you been, let's say, able to go to the office as well?
Yeah, luckily the healthcare system was out of any restriction here in Italy, really to ensure that the basic services were still maintained, and us as a kind of a service provider of the entire life science industry, we were able to continue working. We ensure continuity. And so we of course had to put measures in place that I can cover more and more throughout this presentation. But yeah, we were allowed to continue work, and especially given the autologous patient that we treat, it was essential for us to stay online.
Thank you very much for this insight here. So, Bruce, how's it in Philadelphia? I mean, you are not in New York, not in Boston area, where we heard a lot of, let's say, news. How was it in Philadelphia? But you're in the scene of cell and gene, which is all around your place.
Yeah. So I can tell you that the University of Pennsylvania has had a mandatory work from home since mid-March, and I've been home since then. It's been many decades since I've been not traveling more than 5 or 10 miles from home. And at first, the instructions went out, okay, you can have 1 or 2 people per research laboratory, but the essential clinical work, of course, would go on in COVID research. But then they closed down the research laboratories, and the expectation has been that less than 10% of the people and less than 10% of the research activity has been ongoing. Just in the past week or two, some of the elective surgeries have started, some of the ambulatory care appointments have started with changes to the waiting rooms, and there has been the go-ahead as of June 4th to begin phase 1 of the ramp-up, which means 25% of the research activity. Now, the clinical manufacturing laboratory, that has been operating, not at full capacity due to some clinical sites, such as those in New York, not accepting clinical trial patients, but we expect that that will begin a slow ramp up as well. And then there are factors to be met before going to the next stage, phase 2, which is 50% research capacity, and then the new normal. We don't know what the new normal will look like, but the new normal is phase 3. So my personal view is it will be a long time, many months, until we are at the new normal. I expect, just as you have observed, there are people of varying levels of compliance in cities, whether it's Philadelphia or San Francisco or Milano or elsewhere. There are people who are compliant, and there are people who are not compliant, and people who are not compliant are going to the bars or crowds, and I expect we will see some resurgences that we will have to deal with. But luckily in Philadelphia, we haven't exceeded the peak of the hospital and ICU capacity. So we've been fortunate in that way.
Does it mean, Bruce, that when this kind of restriction came up with like 5-10 mile travel, let's say distance at a max, was this like something which affected you personally at that time? And was there any law enforcement around?
No, so I should make the distinction that was my personal choice. So we were on work at home. I made the decision not to go out because really there wasn't any place to go to. All the stores are closed except for the grocery stores, and those are close by. So I didn't travel. That was a personal decision. Just this past Saturday, we went to visit our daughter in Washington, D.C. That was a 2.5-hour drive. And so that was the first time I've seen some more people. A lot of people wearing masks outside in Washington, which is a good thing. But it just struck home to me something that Lizette mentioned about being social and seeing people. It was the first time seeing people outside of the family and outside of the neighborhood in more than 2 months. And I think we all underestimate how much that impacts our emotional well-being in dealing with people. And the water cooler talk is lost when you're in the clinical facility or the manufacturing facility or the research lab. There are all those interactions that are by chance that have been lost or certainly vastly minimized now.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Bruce. That is interesting. We experienced the same things here, that everybody actually underestimated the social interaction. I mean, we have been so much used to traveling and to events, conferences where we all met, and suddenly this is gone. First, I thought it's a kind of relief, and soon it came out that this is essential for our, let's say, all together. Olga, I would hand over the next question to you then. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, dear panel. So our next question is actually about the situation in the industry, and I think it's going to be very, very logical passage from what Bruce we've been mentioning about the situation with research and labs and the manufacturing. So we hear and see, we witness different pieces of information here, right? So we heard that the European launch and US filing of one of the expected product approvals from the field for 2020 is Zynteglo from Bluebird was delayed, while some of companies, they announced actually no impact on their clinical trials. On the flip side, we can see that a lot of clinical trials needed to be completely stopped, and there were some draft publications recently figuring on the internet with numbers around over 1,000 clinical trials stopped during COVID due to COVID-19. And so I'm not even speaking about the preclinical programs and the R&D process. So what is your general feeling about the impact of coronavirus crisis for the industry pipeline? Would you like to continue your comment on this, Bruce?
Yeah, so we have several impacts that we know about. One is on staff, and there may be different policies in different regions and states and companies on the requirement to work at home or the desirability of working at home. There may be people who are ill as well, and then they obviously have to self-isolate. Perhaps their contacts self-isolate. So the first impact would be staffing. The second impact, I would say, is the clinical impact that we were discussing a moment ago. So for clinical trial or commercial, are the patients able to get to the medical facility? If they are able, are they willing to go for follow-up appointments, for example, in clinical trials? And then a third impact I'd highlight is supply chain that has impacts on manufacturing. And that's everything from the couriers to deliver stem cell products to the shipping, the availability of cargo flights, and the ripple effect of the high demand of PPE for medical facilities. How does that affect the clean room and manufacturing facilities? So there's a multifactorial impact, and I think there's going to be some sorting out, some alternative sourcing, some relief valves, but I think we should expect, just like when you go to the grocery store, there are shortages, there are going to be some supply shortages. So how do we think of, not in the cell and gene industry so much, but in other industries, there has been just-in-time delivery. That, I think, is a huge issue for cell and gene. And even more now than before, we've got to think about stockpiling critical reagents and supplies.
Yeah, absolutely. So more strategical thinking, some lessons learned clearly. So what is your feedback, Lizette?
So my feedback is going to come from the point of view of cellular therapy labs, because when we went into, when everything started, I was still working at UCSF, and I was there for maybe 4 to 5 weeks during this whole stay home, but I was working at a hospital, so I have to go to work during that time. And I can tell you that it was a big impact in transplants. The bone marrow transplant program started to talk about, well, we need to really stop doing transplants, infusions that are not immediately needed, because we wanted to keep patients outside of the hospital, or outside of the streets. We wanted to keep them safe. So the transplants went down quite a bit in numbers. Allogeneic transplants, they are necessary. You know, when we do an allogeneic transplants, you need to do it as soon as possible. So we continue to do that. But then as the quarantine kept going, a big difference happened, and it was, now we use a program that is called an MDP, which they deliver products to our patients from all around the world. And they started, so what we're going to do, if you collect somebody that has no symptoms today, but what about if that patient has COVID, but the symptoms are not there and there's no testing? So we decided, well, let's then get the product, cryopreserve the product, which in the past we have given, as soon as we get it, we give it fresh, cryopreserve the product, and then wait a week or two to give it to the patient, just to make sure that the donor is okay, whatever it came from. So that make a big difference for us, because now we have to cryopreserve more products, you're using more supplies. And like Bruce says, they're going to be supply shortages depending where they're coming from. And we were experiencing a little bit of supply shortages just before COVID. I can't imagine now with COVID. So yeah, that was a big difference. And the difference about having a small cellular therapy lab, because we're in San Francisco, there's no space, and having staff working together. You know, we didn't have pretty much that safety, the 6 feet in between us. So it was kind of difficult. And most of my staff decided to wear masks from the very beginning. And we also, the UCSF allow us that if they wanted to take a day off to make sure that we have more space between us, they allow us to do that, which it was incredible, because my staff really was feeling a little bit nervous. That's another thing. People were really mentally suffering. They have to take public transportation to come to work, because in San Francisco, not too many people have the cars to go to work, and they would come to work and they would be really nervous about what they saw in the boss and how they feel about it. So it was hard, those 5 weeks that I stay at UCSF. And then I move into this new job, which is interesting because then I move in the middle of this pandemic situation. And it has been very interesting in how I'm working from home. And there is the component that I haven't really met my coworkers or been to headquarters, just because I can't fly. So it's been quite interesting working just Zoom, and I become an expert in Zoom and all this new things that I never did before.
Yeah.
So it's a big change. It's a big change.
Absolutely. Well, it's a separate experience to be in the middle of changing a role during such a crisis. Absolutely. So, yes.
May I ask to Lizette one more question? Since I was at your side, it was anyway logistically, and the infrastructure is not giving you too much distance to others. So, I mean, could you really work with masks only, or had you wear some special, let's say, gown or anything like protection?
I think we were feeling a little bit safe, because there was a lot of questions before you came into the doors for the hospital. The hospital instituted this screening at the door. So we were all answering questions about how we feel that day. And those questions got more and more specific about all kind of symptoms. At the beginning, it was only fever and coughing. And then by the end, when I was leaving, it was more about even stomach issues and all kind of questions. So at least we knew that. And then by the end, they were giving you a mask. So every morning we will get a new mask. So at least we have the mask. But like you say, there's not too much I couldn't do about togetherness, because we're a small lab. So that's why we control it like that. And we control it by having people, off certain days. So we have maybe half of the staff. But now things are starting to come up again, so you have to have everybody together again. So, but thank God, San Francisco, it started very early, this quarantine, and the numbers are pretty good. But you kind of get nervous about people going out there and feeling too comfortable about it and started to walk without mask,
Yeah, but as already mentioned, you will see such behavior a little bit everywhere. I confirm here too.
Yeah. Let me just add that Penn also had a questionnaire for staff coming in, the essential staff and COVID researchers and healthcare personnel, and a temperature check. So it had to be below 100.0 Fahrenheit. And they were giving masks, and all staff must wear masks now. So that's required.
Yeah. Thank you for this additional piece of information, Bruce. And so now I would like to continue on the same topic on the short-term and long-term impact with Luca. Can you share with us some of your thoughts?
Sure. Well, I've come across several reports and forecasts on how this is going to impact the industry. Some more aggressive reports says 3 to 6 month delay in most of the programs. Something more conservative assume 9 to 12 months because they take into account a potential second or even third wave of lockdown, as the people may act not properly, and we know that getting the economic back on may have some impact on the spread as well. In general, the CAR-T space, from what I've seen, has been a little bit more impacted with respect to rare diseases, for example, because of the necessity of the ICU available in order to administer this kind of risky therapy, but also the type of disease and the urgency of need plays an important role into the requirements of delaying or not delay each clinical trial. One important consideration that is never really addressed is also the economical consideration. We all know that in this industry, most of the companies doing research are pre-commercial companies. So they kind of rely on capital increase in order to finance their research. And this COVID spread has had a pretty significant impact on share price and on the market, thus making probably a little bit difficult to raise money now with this kind of uncertainty situation, and it will last probably for several months to come. So what all these pre-commercial companies tend to do is, of course, to try to extend their cash runway to kind of at least, let's say, 12 months in order to be sure to be able to refinance. And in order to do that, they tend to either cut the early stage program, where they don't have a rapid value creation or to hit milestone that are committed to shareholders and to the finance world in the short term, or to cut the important capital expenditure. So this, of course, is good to extend the cash runway for a few months, but may have an important delay in the kind of mid to very long term. And so this is something that we kind of always forget, because we tend to focus more on the supply chain, on the manufacturing side, as well as on the clinical practice, where you know that the hospital has some limitation to treat patients, but the economic side of that may have a mid-long-term effect as well.
Absolutely, and it's a very valuable remark, and indeed I think we tend to forget this aspect. So I really like how different, let's say, areas of expertise could be united here, and how we could observe this topic from very different perspective. So thank you for these valuable comments, and let's move to the next question, and I hand it into you, Chris.
Thanks, Olga. Yeah, under COVID-19, I think one of the key questions here for all of us is cell collections, because we need them in order to, let's say, being productive and doing what this new technology is able to do. So visits at apheresis centers, hospitals, numerous intra-human contacts, this is all, let's say, social distancing, especially under the observation, what you said, Olga, to not being close, but you have to, let's say, stuck with the donor and patients. So let's stay with Luca. Luca, from your experience, what are the most challenging points in cell collection these days, and how, from your point of view, could be the supply chain optimized?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. We, as a manufacturer, are not that much involved into kind of the real physical collection, so I will let Bruce and Lizette kind of explore more on that. From our standpoint, we can definitely say that we can divide a little bit the autologous world from the allogeneic world. Autologous, you don't necessarily care that much of positivity of the patient, as the same cells kind of go back to the patient, as long as you make sure that in the process of taking the cells out, modifying them, and getting the cells back in, you preserve your operators from getting contaminated from that, as well as those cells to get contaminated from the operators. Now, luckily enough, the standard kind of GMP requirements in this field really are designed to make sure that any sort of airborne disease are prevented to go and cross-contaminate cells and operator. So we didn't really have to change significantly our way of working. All our SOP and practice were in the manufacturing, of course, not in the collection, were solid enough, and we didn't even really require any pre-screen of COVID for both operators and patient cells. For allogeneic therapies, this is much different, of course, because you start with an healthy donor, and this is all where the entire supply chain of biological material traveling and making cross-border shipment has been impacted. They can often lock at the border and with long timelines. So we had issue with biological material, and so I see that kind of therapies being a little bit more impacted. Also, because I link back to my comment before, the urgency of need for an autologous therapy is generally much higher than for classical allogeneic therapy, where the therapy should have been already manufactured and being available. So without that much of a requirement of collection in a promptly matter and then shipping to and back of the manufacturing center.
Right. If I may, Chris, to have just a little question here to Luca. So at all these events that we're all following, you know, here and there, we always come back to this topic of introduction of more and more closed systems. Do you think that coming back to the same debate on, you know, introducing more closed systems is beneficial for in the current context as well?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, that will be independently of whatever situation you have outside.
Exactly.
It would be a preferred way of having that from not only a safety standpoint, but also timelines and cost. The reality is that we have been working on that for several years. We will continue working on that for many years to come before we really achieve a completely closed system. For some processes, it's really hard to even foresee that such a closed system will be ever reached. So, but as I said, at the moment, GMP guidelines across the FDA and Europe are solid enough to kind of ensure safety of operators and cells. So this is not generally the concern in this crisis.
Thank you.
Thanks, Luca. Bruce, for you the same question, and since we know you're working on the latest therapies, solid tumor, I think this is crucial for you, isn't it?
Yeah, so what I can tell you, after speaking to some of our clinicians and others, is that if the principal investigators call the patients in, the patients want to come in, particularly for the leukemia patients. What has limited the visits is the hospital policy on essential clinical work and essential visits. In bottom line is the leukemia volumes are pretty much the same. Some of the solid tumor trials, the PIs may not want to call the patients in or enroll right away. But as I said up front, now over the past week or two, we're beginning to gradually turn up. And as far as the commercial CAR Ts, there's not been an effect. So that has remained more or less steady. But I think another trend that we're going to see throughout the healthcare industry is this transition to telehealth and telemedicine. So some of the post-infusion visits have been converted. And now if it's a blood draw, that can be drawn elsewhere and sent into our correlative studies lab, then that can be done. But I think we're going to see some of the transition for some of the follow-up visits to telehealth and telemedicine.
Bruce, you just said that on CAR T, that was pretty much steady.
Yeah, the commercial
wasn't those
part.
shutdown not giving, let's say, a hard time to logistics? As we know, everything has to be shipped forth and back. And I mean, I can understand that the labs could work because under the circumstances, they already do manufacture and modify cells. That was not so much different from the, so to say, protection requirements, which we are enabled now. And I thought, from what we read just on an article, that more than 1,000 trials have been delayed. I don't know whether this is 100% true, but your comment on this would be really highly appreciated.
Yeah, so what I've been hearing is that the commercial CAR T volume has not been affected. Now that's at the University of Pennsylvania. Other centers may be more affected. I imagine New York, for example, maybe Milan, some of that has been affected, and certainly there are hotspots elsewhere. But I think another thing that has been seen is the local patients can get in easily. Penn draws regionally, nationally, and internationally. Certainly the international visits would be down, and probably some of the national visits where people have to fly because of the resistance to flying and the unavailability of flights. So it's changing the population at Penn, but remember, like UCSF, we draw from all over. I think it's different at some of the other medical centers that may have more of a local pull.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Bruce, last one. Do you anticipate major delays on expected drugs therapies like hitting the market this year, and then maybe that this not happening this year, like next year?
Yeah, I think there will be some delays, and it depends at what stage the company is at, right? Are they in the middle of a trial where they need to gather data for submission? So that's going to have a ripple effect. But I think the delays may or may not happen to a certain degree. Something that I do think could have an effect is the contract manufacturing organizations and how they're affected, and then delays that may impact cell and gene companies that are reliant on contract manufacturing organizations. The other part to the CMOs to consider is some of them may be called on to manufacture vaccines. So then that further impacts the capacity and the waiting list for the cell and gene companies that are reliant on those CMOs.
Mm.
Right.
Good. Maybe to dive deeper on this, by the way, to all of you and the audience, Lizette is the host of a very powerful expert group based on Google. Lizette, let's say you have really an insight on the infrastructures inside the, let's say, institutes. Your comment and maybe your experience and your recent talks with your expert group, maybe it's very good to learn more about what this means for them.
So yes, like you say, we have the Google group for cell therapies, and I can tell you also from UCSF, they were impacted, and maybe because San Francisco was expected, has a very dense population, similar to New York City, and I believe the thought was it will be as bad as New York, but because we started a very early quarantine, it really didn't happen. But at the beginning, we didn't know. So things stopped pretty much, like the clinical trials have to stop because we didn't have the CRCs. They have to work from home. We wanted the patients to stay home. So I saw a big decline in clinical trials, and I already explained how they deal with the autologous and allogeneic transplants. So what I hear from the Google group is pretty much the same. There was a slowdown in most of the institutions, and some institutions continue to do as many, and I'm sure that has to do where they are located, if they were affected by COVID or not, as bad as others were affected. So you can hear about many changes. Like the other day, somebody mentioned that they were thinking, administration were thinking about separating these two people that work together, one in one place, one in the other one, from pretty much from now on. And how can we do that? And I'm thinking in my mind, wow, that would be kind of hard for a cellular therapy to just not have people working side by side. But one thing that we forgot to talk about is testing. And I think testing is going to be the way the institutions are going to start collecting and doing transplant again. It is my understanding that at UCSF, they're going to be doing testing at least 72 hours prior to collection for autologous and allogeneic donors. And like I said, I believe for now they're going to continue cryopreserving and not doing fresh infusions for allos, just because we don't know too much about COVID-19. And one thing that we know for sure is that more than 50% of the people affected may not have any symptoms. So you can be collected this person, feel pretty much normal, and be affected. And that goes for autologous too, because you don't really want to transplant and give high dose chemotherapy to somebody with COVID. You know, that's one thing that we don't want to do. So testing is going to be ramped up. They're going to be doing testing also for people that are going into the hospital for a transplant. They're going to do that too. So testing is really something that is going to be part of what we do as a standard. I don't know for how long. I don't know for, are we talking a year? Are we talking a year and a half? But do we have enough testing? Thankfully at UCSF, they're doing their own testing. So that helps. But what about other institutions, smaller institutions? Can they do the same? So it is a question more for resources. Do we have the resources to do everything that needs to change from now on?
Totally
Right. Thank
agree
you.
on that important point on the testing. We're having all patients who come in are tested 2 days before they arrive. And in general, for society, for industry, for academia, for everyone, the availability of testing is going to be the passport back to recovery. And one other impact on patients we haven't really touched on that I think is going to have a ripple effect is I read in March and April, maybe 90 to 95% of routine breast cancer and colon cancer screening was not happening.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
think about the impact of that. 17% of chemotherapy visits were not happening, ripple effect on that. So I think the impact on patients is going to be something that we may not see for months or perhaps next year or years in some cases.
Right. That's a very valuable remark. So what I could hear here is that major messages is more testing and also more cryopreservation in this supply chain. Okay. Thank you so much for these comments. So I suggest you to move on because we are actually running out of time. So the next question, probably very briefly regarding the supply chain and some particular items of consumable materials that were actually disrupted, the supply of which was disrupted during the lockdown. Would you like to comment on that, Luca?
Sure. Again, we were among the first one hit in this pandemic, and so
Exactly.
we of course tried to. First reaction was to increase our stock, and so we did. The reality is that we didn't really have any significant issue on the supply chain of most of the item, media, cytokines. They either were very well stocked at the supplier side, or they were able to continue manufacturing. So we had very limited item. The main one was, of course, the DPI kind of so personal protection device like mask, gloves, and in general government for manufacturing, because priority were given to hospital, and this is totally understandable. So we were able through standard supplier, emergency supplier, and also with a little bit of creativity, for example, getting our also R&D staff getting ready to dress like a standard GMP operator if that were required, just to continue. Luckily enough, that was not required, but we were kind of facing that kind of issue. Second has been on biological material that are very limited items, and I already comment on that. Third one has been on equipment, not really again on the equipment itself, because again here people like Aseptic, Barkey, and many others were able to continue deliver. The only limitation with the equipment was, of course, IQ, OQ, and training, where generally supplier need to come on site and do this kind of stuff. So again, we need to create some creative solution out there, like kind of do ourselves the unboxing and installing stuff and getting like a little bit of a GoPro camera on your operator's helmet, and then try to connect the cable with the supplier on the line and tell you cut the red rope, right, or stuff like that. So, but in general, I must say that my takeaway for this crisis is that the supply has been less impacted than the demand. So most of the delay and were really linked to the ability of a hospital to continue enrolling patients rather than having viral vectors available and cells engineered in time. In general, I think most CDMOs ensure a business continuity, either full like we did, or at least partial to some priority. Here, all the industry has been extremely open. All our clients were initially very scared of that. There was even equity research with the title like Lombardy-based MolMed being in the center of the pandemic may limit the cell and gene therapy advancement, recognizing that we have over 10% market share in this field. So there was a very high panic at the beginning, but the openness of clients and biotech calling us every day and telling, look, I care about you, about your staff safety, so we can prioritize a little bit if that's required. Now, it was not required at the end of the day, so but it's really coming together and deciding what to maintain and what to move forward. Of course, some activities, non-critical activities, were postponed, like self-audit, open deviation on something that could have been postponed. But really, my takeaway here is that suppliers, CDMOs, and general manufacturing have managed a little bit the hit, whereas pipeline companies and hospital have taken the most of it at the moment.
Okay, so from your side, you can confirm that at least for the viral vector capacity, it's not been really affected by the COVID-19 crisis, since the previous discussions, even before the crisis, were lots of concerns about the current capacity. So you don't foresee any major disruption in the supply of viral vector?
Yeah, well, viral vector are kind of an off-the-shelf stuff where you don't rely on particular biological materials, so it's really a matter of having a decent stock to work with. The only potential impact is the one that Bruce highlighted before. So how much of this capacity may be absorbed for vaccine that may use similar technologies and similar process that can absorb some CDMOs and some significant line of capacity. For those of one who are not involved in vaccine, have a different technology, I would assume that there will be a limit impact. Of course, the general feeling that capacity on viral vector is constrained is something true, not as much as it's generally spread across the industry. There are still plenty of CDMOs with excess capacity that are still building new capacity that is coming online this year, next year. But in general, yes, this has been a little bit of the constraint, but I would say a little independent from the COVID, with the only exception of the vaccine.
All right. Thank you, Luca. So would you like to share on this, Bruce?
Yeah, I think my answer is pretty much aligned. Our manufacturing facility, at least, had been very good about stocking up in general and in prep for this. Their supply chain has not really been affected. And as far as the other operations, one, Luca touched equipment IQOQ. We had some of that planned on pause for some new equipment, but more so the process development and engineering runs for new manufacturing procedures that has been affected. So otherwise, pretty much in line what Luca has just said.
All right. Would you like to add anything, Lizette, from your perspective?
Yeah, I think from the cellular therapy lab perspective, it's a little bit hard to stockpile supplies, so they may be affected a little bit more. If we were having problems before COVID-19 with some of our supply, like cryo bags and DMSO, and so I can imagine that maybe we will continue to have problems, and the problem here is the stockpile. We don't have the space to have, well, let's just buy this many and have it in there in case something happens. So maybe a little bit more problematic for the cellular therapy labs.
Okay, right. It's a different perspective, absolutely. Thank you for this comment. Would you like to proceed further, Chris? Probably just before that, I would like to announce that we are really running out of time. And just to confirm with the speakers, if you are actually able to stay 10 minutes more than foreseen to be able to cover the few other topics that are left and leave at least one question take at least one question from the audience.
Yeah, of course. Last question was actually to all of you, and let's start with Lizette. What would you take away from the, let's say, experience with COVID-19, its regulation, new life, so to say, as well as for your work life, of course. And after this, we move to one selected question from the audience before we close. So, Lizette, what do you take home, let's say?
Well, I think this will also pass, and we will be back to a new normal. We don't know what the new normal is going to be. I don't believe anything will be the same again. We need to learn from our mistakes and shortcomings. We need to be more proactive than reactive when it comes to emergency response. One thing that I don't want to see that happen is that we become this virtual kind of world where everything is going to be virtually done, and because I really believe that this person-to-person contact is extremely important. As a human, as a social being, we need to be able to connect again that way.
Right.
Thank you so much, Lizette. Luca.
Yeah, well, I think it's very common, but this experience, I thought all of us do smart work much better than we used to. We now are really professional into managing remote meeting, work effectively on the phone, do marketing, sales, and any sort of other activity on remote. Of course, this is not going to be enough. This is not going to be substituting that. But in general, I see us going back not to where we started from, but in a situation where we can leverage much more this virtual reality and media much better than we used to. It's really effective. It's less time consuming, and it really forced not us as an industry, but us as a really world to move forward. And since we were all into this together, it really bounded all the supply chain much more than before. It's not more my need versus your need, is like our common need, and how can each of us come together and try to survive and overcome the limitation that we have at the moment. So it really unified a lot the players in the industry.
Yeah.
Right.
Very good words. It seems to me, Luca, that you experienced something even among the team that they you have a very emotional touch to that. That's why I think this is something maybe inside MolMed as well as maybe in the community, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, well, I know. Well, in MolMed, I mean, it's I have been asked to increase smart working for years, and now I've asked from my team, please allow us to go back to the office. We are stuck at home for a very long time. But in terms of community, we also contributed a little bit to the community, not really as a MolMed, but as a trade. We donated to the construction of an hospital in Milan, out of the trade, the former trade village that has been converted in slightly over a month into an emergency hospital with, I would say, over 200 beds. Now, those haven't been really used. I think now they host 20 or 30 patients, really because the time it required to build the peak was over. But we really live in a difficult area, so we also have some commitment at the national, regional level.
Absolutely.
So Bruce,
Yeah.
you for this the same question, of course.
Yeah. So I'll give you one personal lesson and one professional. The personal is the importance of the routine. I have instituted getting up not too much later, maybe 15 minutes later than usual. I go out for a walk around the block in the morning, simulating the walk from my parking garage to my office. And in the evening, I simulate the walk from my office to my parking garage. And that's important for some physical activity. And then the professional lesson is from IACT. We had to adapt very quickly from an in-person meeting in Paris where we were expecting 2,000 people to a virtual platform that I think is the most immersive virtual platform that I've seen. So we're excited about next Thursday and next Friday. We will be live around the clock, around the world. If you haven't seen the platform, go to IACT2020.com. And then related to that is we're on these Zoom meetings or whatever your platform is many times per day, and it gives the opportunity to exchange content, but it's the release valve. So what I've started doing is some virtual happy hours with some colleagues and some friends, where we just get together not to talk about business, but just how everyone is doing. And Lizette mentioned the networking and bumping into people. I think that's important to keep, just have this informal, and maybe something comes up, but it's the ability just to commiserate and see how everyone is doing, I think is important for mental health and also a networking perspective. And I should add, through the ICT meeting, we do have networking and partnering. So we're trying to do something in 2020 that we might have done in 2025.
We will all be joining you, Bruce, as you know.
Yeah,
And,
exactly. So it's already next week.
Olga,
Very excited.
Considering the time, we are slightly over already, but maybe it's time to.
Yes.
follow our
So
agenda
let's probably
shortly.
pick one question from the audience. So if we are all right with this, considering that we have some time frames. So we have here a question from the audience. So the question, I quoted, I'd like to know if they are performing both PCR and serological testing to be sure that patients are free of SARS before treating them. So both PCR and serological testing, is it something that is performed usually for regarding testing?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. We do have several platforms up and running for the virus testing, and we also have several platforms up and running for the antibody testing. The virus testing would really be performed on people who are exhibiting symptoms or perhaps coming into the ER or for emergency surgery. The other ambulatory visits, they will also get it. And then the antibody testing is going to be rolled out first to the healthcare workers to determine the safety of being able to be in those environments. So to be determined is the extent to which everyone is going to receive antibody testing. We know that there are asymptomatic individuals and there are potential exposures. So again, I think that testing, both the virus and the antibody testing, is going to be our passport back to recovery.
Right. Thank you for this comment, Bruce. Would the other panelists like to add on this?
I think Bruce covered pretty much everything that everybody else is doing.
Okay, good. So, Chris, I think that we're now reaching to the end of our event. Would you like to say some words of some message, some thank you message?
Absolutely, Olga, and of course, Lizette, Bruce, Luca. It is an incredible honor kicking off the webinar series Insights with Chris and Olga together with you. It just hasn't been an extreme pleasure doing this. It worked perfectly fine as well, thanks to our audience, which has been so loyal. As I could see, we had a slight increase over the time, and still having the same amount of people with us. Yeah, we hope you enjoyed it as well. We would like to give you the opportunity, of course, also putting out some words to everybody out there in the world who is currently listening. Before I close my words, I would say we have created a little gift for everybody here who's joining us. We created together with Lizette, Luca and Bruce a Spotify list with their favorite songs to bring us through this time. So Lizette, Luca and Bruce dedicated 3 songs as well. Olga and me added 1 song. This Spotify list will be shortly available after this show today. And thank you so much from my side. So Lizette, do you want to start with your closing?
So I just want to say thank you, Olga and Chris. This was amazing. It's great to be surrounded by people that believe in science and that are doing so much for science. So I'm very, very honored to be here with you guys today, and I thank you.
Thank you so much, Lizette, for your words.
Mm-hmm.
Some words of wisdom from you, Bruce. Would you like to share?
Yeah, so I think we all understand it's going to be tough sailing for a while. There will be calm after the storm, but it will take skill to navigate in this uncertain environment. I think healthcare in general and cell and gene has the opportunity to bank on some goodwill from the public. And it's up to us to take that goodwill and to turn it into creating new therapies for patients. And that's what we all look forward to. And again, thank you to Olga and Chris for organizing this webinar and for the opportunity to participate. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Thank
It's
you.
very kind of you. And Luca, some take-home message from you, maybe.
Yeah, well, let me start thanking, as they do, also you and Chris. Organizing this such a great event and running that so smoothly is not entirely common. I do quite a few webinars these days, and most of them end up having connection problem or some failures. So running that smoothly is already a pretty good achievement. But the big thank goes, of course, to everybody's in this industry. It faced collapse in a very bad way in the last few months. I believe we all made it through decently. Patients have been treated. Companies are still out there doing their businesses, and so we are overcoming that in the best possible way. So thanks to all the stakeholders that are involved in this industry, from the supplier you are all the way into the clinical centers as my co-panelists here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Luca.
So,
Luca, since you mentioned the technical background, Olga and me would like to say this: what we experience today here with all of you isn't possible without one person. Her name is Jennifer Joe, back in Boston, United States. And she is our production director here for organizing this as a background team. Thank you so much as well from our side.
Yeah, so the very last message is about meeting all of you next week at ICT. So it's the first ICT virtual event, right, where all of us gonna probably meet. So I'm very excited to be there. Aseptic Technologies will be an exhibitor. I don't know how it's going to look or how exactly it's going to happen, but we're all pretty excited about the virtual experience. So don't hesitate to pass by. I look forward to meet you all there. We're going to introduce some new product there for aseptic fill and finish of cell and gene therapy products. Don't hesitate to get some appointments with Chris, and we're really looking forward to meet all of you, our panel, and all of you audience at the ICT.
Thank you again. Stay tuned, everyone, and safe, of course, and see you hopefully very soon as well live. Thank you again to everyone here. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye.